Hello and welcome. I'm Justin Costelli, and this is All About Your Benjamins, the podcast, where we'll be discussing financial planning, investing, and non-financial topics like personal development, fitness, and nutrition. You can learn more and stay up to date at allaboutyourbenjamins.com.
Justin Costelli is a financial advisor and founder of RLS Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor in Indiana. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not advice. Talk to your financial advisors if you have questions.
All right, Ashby, thank you for joining me today. For those of you who don't know Ashby Daniels, he is the retirement field guide. He is a good friend of mine that we've met, of course, on Twitter, just like everybody else that's ever been on this podcast, I feel like. But we've developed a pretty good friendship. We have a study group together. We met up in Columbus last year, I think it was, or was it this year?
This year.
The time
Wasn't
flies
it?
by.
Was it the spring?
We met up in Columbus to meet in person. We filmed a talking shop, so you may have seen him there. But Ashby's niche and where he focuses solely on his practice is in the retirement field. So he is your retirement expert. He's about my age, so he is going to be the retirement guy for the next 30, 40 years. So you will get to know him if you're thinking about retirement very well. And I wanted to have him on today to talk a little bit about retirement and some of the things that we can think about as we're planning for retirement to have, or not have a successful retirement, but put our clients and put ourselves in the best situations for a successful retirement. Obviously, no guarantees here. And we're going to be talking about some strategy and some things. They're not going to be recommendations. I'm going to get that out of the way right now. Purely conversation pieces, things to take to your financial advisor to ask if it makes sense for you or just to educate yourself. So today is all about education, not recommendations. Don't go implement anything we might talk about. Talk to your financial advisor first. Did I forget anything, Ashby?
It sums it up well.
All right. Well, before we get to all of that, we have to credit our mutual friend, Tyrone Ross, for how I want to start our podcast today, because the last year, Tyrone has done a tremendous job bringing light to diversity and to different backgrounds and different stories and, backgrounds that friends of ours have had that maybe we didn't know. And I didn't know about your childhood. And you made a good point when we were preparing for this, that how often are you asked about your childhood? But you have a different, not a different, but you just have a unique experience that has shaped you to how you look at things today and into this, your story. So because it's different and it's maybe not what people would perceive on the surface level, and to credit Tyrone presenting new stories out there, I kind of wanted to see if you would take a few minutes to talk about your childhood and how it shaped you, since it may not be what you would think a financial advisor's background might be growing up.
Sure. Well, it was a really interesting conversation with Tyrone, because after he had they had a live feed on Twitter with Tyrone and our friend Alex, and it struck a chord with me because we've heard Tyrone talk so much about his own childhood, and I love that and respect that. And it struck me that we don't really talk enough about our childhoods and how we grew up. Many of our stories are unique and would certainly surprise a lot of people. And where we come from is such an integral part about who we are. It impacts our views of the world, impacts how we interact with the world, our generosity, how we manage our monthly spending, how we invest our money, our faith. But it struck me because really until this conversation with Tyrone, I really can't recall a whole lot of times where I've been asked about my childhood. And so if I'm honest as well, I really don't do a very good job asking others about their childhood. And so, I grew up in Surrey County, Virginia, and this all tied together because being what could be perceived as a privileged white guy in finance, my background would probably be pretty surprising to people. So, I grew up in Surrey County, Virginia. So shout out to the 757. It's a rural area. It's a big farming community, but it's a small town. It's a small community. And, just as an example of that, our entire county goes to just one school system. That might provide some context. So, by comparison, I live in Pittsburgh now, which is obviously a city, but within the county of Allegheny County, there's 46 school districts. So, being one school district, and then on top of that, the school district that I went to was primarily black, which most people would not think, especially being a rural farming community. But it was primarily a black community, still is primarily a black community, even, when I left that school probably almost 20 years ago now. But being the minority, I certainly can understand, some of the issues that come along with being a minority. However, kind of an additional point is that Surrey County was also a pretty poor county, or I think as they refer to it today, economically disadvantaged. That's, I guess, a more proper way of saying poor. Um, a memory that comes to me is that they used to give out, when you would go to lunch, they would give out different color tickets in the lunch line. And each ticket was for something different. So if one ticket was for a full price lunch, one ticket was for reduced fare lunch, and one ticket was for free lunch. Well, throughout my time in that school, we had all three. So at some point we had all three different color tickets. And so there were certainly plenty of people who were worse off, but I definitely remember what it feels like. And I also, I think, as a result of that experience, I probably view government assistance a little bit differently than many of my contemporaries do. As a result, I mean, some other memories. I remember it being cold in the wintertime, and it would be about 50 degrees in our house, and so me, my brother and sister, and I would run downstairs and sit in front of a kerosene heater, to warm up in the morning. And we shopped at thrift stores for our clothes. We lived in a variety of houses, throughout our childhood, particularly as my parents were going through a divorce. Money became tighter. I remember Christmases where we were told in advance it was going to be a tough Christmas, and by a tough Christmas it meant that we were going to get a movie or a pocket knife, and that might be a weird gift to some people, but remember, this is rural Virginia, so things are a little bit different. But ironically, those are the Christmases that I remember. Not so much the ones where things got better, but the ones where they were a little rougher were the ones that I remember in their fond memories. But despite our situation, giving back was super important in my family. I mean, my parents, before they were divorced, and we, even though we were on potentially at the time, I don't remember the timing of everything, but whether we were on reduced fare lunches or free lunches, giving back was super important in our family. We would, every Christmas and Thanksgiving, my parents would call social services and ask about who the people were in the county who had maybe fell through the cracks of the systems, and we would go deliver food to people at Thanksgiving and Christmas. That was our Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I thought that's always stood out to me. My parents ran an outreach center out of our backyard. We had a building that was delivered to us that we ran, a clothing shelter where we gave clothes to people who didn't have any clothes. So, I think that it's just really interesting because most people wouldn't know that. Most people wouldn't think that. Certainly, based on where we are today. I mean, you look at, my mom. So I have one brother and one sister from my mom and my dad, and then I have three other brothers after my mom got remarried. And coming from two parents who initially had no degrees, they have, my mom at least has 6 children with college degrees. So it's kind of interesting, and but growing up poor, if you will, I can tell you it was a blessing in a lot of ways, but I was also kind of blessed in the sense that I didn't even realize that we were poor, because the town that we grew up in, so many of us were in the same situation that I imagine now in retrospect was a huge blessing, because there wasn't really a ton of comparisons. Everybody was kind of in the same boat. But one thing that really stuck out to me is that, my parents were always hardworking, and, they were hardworking for a variety of reasons, but for a variety of reasons, they just didn't make a lot of money. And so one thing that sticks out is they valued hard work above all else. And just as an example, when I was probably 8 or 10 years old, I can't remember how old I was exactly, but my mom decided to go back to school. And so me, my brother, and my sister would all be sitting in class with her in the back of college classes when we were like 8, 9, 10 years old, so that she could get her degree. So we'd be sitting in the back, with all these other kids up front, and we'd be sitting in the back of class with my mom hitting us saying, you guys got to be quiet over there, because you're going to disturb everybody else in class. But, she went back to school, got her degree, and now she teaches at the school that we grew up in. And she takes, now that she's in a little bit of a different financial situation. She spends a lot of time and money taking care of a lot of these kids that she actually teaches, and invests in these kids and encourages these kids and lets them know that they matter and that they can make something of themselves. And I mean, I know that when my mom teaches middle school, but I know a lot of kids that once they graduate, they come to thank her and tell her that, she's the reason that they've either graduated at all, or she's the reason that they've decided to move on and go to college, or a variety of things. So, I just think it's a unique story. I don't, I'm certainly very thankful for how I grew up. It's impactful to me in terms of, a lot of my clients realize that I'm a pretty frugal person. I mean, we happen to have been successful to this point in our life, and I'm certainly very thankful for the blessings that we've been given and the childhood that I have. But it certainly continues to impact me, and I think that the advisory community as a whole may be overlooking this opportunity to have these kinds of discussions, myself included. So I'm not casting stones, myself included, because this has just recently come up as kind of an epiphany. Why am I not having this conversation? Because my childhood impacts immensely who I am as a person today, and how I view money, how I invest money, how I think about our monthly budget. So anyways, that was kind of a long monologue, so I apologize. But that's I think it's an interesting, and I think it's also an opportunity, I think, for the advisory community as a whole, as Tyrone has alluded to, an opportunity for us to go in and see some of these kids and talk to these kids and encourage these kids. If we want more diversity in our industry, in our profession, then this is where it starts. So
I kept it a
yeah.
monologue on purpose. Like I could have interrupted if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. So I was taking some notes. There's a couple of things I wanted to just point out that from your story. The first thing is, I think that another huge benefit of you sharing your story and Tyrone sharing your story is a lot of us don't know what we don't know. So, my childhood story is nothing like yours. Like I didn't grow up. We weren't rich. We were middle class. Tyrone just did that video talking about life as a stagger and the different places on the track when you're running. I've probably grown up in lane, maybe not 4, because I think that's the best, but like maybe 5, like kind of in the middle, one of the good positions. Um, but there's a lot of things that I don't realize because I didn't experience them. And when we talk about, like, privilege is a big word right now, and privilege is a word that I think people cringe to say or hear. It's a kind of a bad word, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You don't realize the privilege you have until you hear other people's stories. So, I wouldn't have known what it would be like to grow up having to go in front of the kerosene heater to stay warm. Like we never had that issue. Like we didn't grow up in big mansions, but we always had heat. We always got to take vacations. Like we lived a good life. So I don't know that. And without hearing it from somebody that I know or somebody willing to share that story, I can't really get an understanding. I don't have a full understanding, but I do understand a little bit more of what it's like, and I can be more sympathetic. And that's the whole point of this: is those of us that didn't have that experience, whatever it might be, once we hear about it, we can understand, so we can be more sympathetic and understanding, and then potentially shape our businesses to be able to help more people that are experiencing that. Not saying that doesn't exist, that's not true, that's just a political narrative or something that people make up, that it really is in fact true. And then we can begin to address the issue like you talked about. The other thing I thought was interesting was you mentioned that the Christmas that was the pocket knife, or the movie, was the more memorable one because those that had better memories, is more meaningful. And I think that just kind of ties into an underlying theme that we hear a lot, but I don't know if people really believe in it, that money doesn't always buy happiness. Now obviously money makes things happier, but the Christmases that you got more weren't as memorable as the ones that were less. And they weren't memorable because they were bad because you didn't get less, but there was just more to it beyond the gifts. Maybe it was closer family. There was the love that was there that was more important than the stuff. So I just think that is an example of how you don't solve all the problems with being able to have more money and buy more stuff, that it's more about relationships and families and trying to build that into your life. And then
Well,
the final, oh, good. Yeah.
well, I think it's not to keep bringing up Tyrone, but he preaches gratitude, and I think that a lot of the reason that I remember those experiences, and a lot of the reason that I find myself thankful for the childhood that I had, is that both of my parents. I mean, both my parents expressed immense gratitude for what they did have, and that was evidenced by sharing what little they did have. They ended up sharing so much of it with people who had less.
And that was my
And so
next
while
note. My next note was
okay,
how you guys gave even though you didn't have much. You're on free and reduced lunches and you are making an effort to go out and help others who have even less than you, which I think is just phenomenal. I think that probably speaks to a lot to your character, to the way you do business and why you came down this path, which is where I'm going to get to once we get done kind of wrapping up your story. But yeah, that was the other thing I was going to mention was the fact that even though you didn't have much, your family still found a way to give. And then you have families on the other end of the spectrum that have so much and don't do any giving. Um,
well, I still hear my parents in the back of my head. I mean, my dad couldn't drive by, a broken down car. It doesn't matter if he's going to his own wedding. He'd be late for his own wedding to help somebody on the side of the road. I mean, and I can't drive by to this day. I can't drive by somebody who's broken down without stopping because all I can hear is my dad in the back of my head saying, "You should have stopped."
mhm.
And, that person needed help. And, my mom is the same way. So it's, my mom is always looking for ways to help people and in most cases anonymously. Because she doesn't even want the credit. She just wants people to get the help. And I think
Mhm.
that, that's why the conversation with Tyrone was so impactful to me and why I just said, all right, well, it's time for me to start doing something about it. And so, trying to get into these schools and talk to these kids and help them see that there's more out there. And so, I think gratitude is everything.
So how much of your childhood that we just learned about, and again, thank you for sharing that, because I know it's not always, our personal lives aren't always easy to put out on other public platforms, but I think it'll do good. I think it will resonate with other people who maybe experienced the same thing. It'll open eyes to people who didn't, and then hopefully some young guy or gal finds this podcast, has a similar background as yours, and says, "Hey, if Ashby can do it, so can I." Do you think that your experience in your childhood shaped you to become a financial advisor, or like do you think that impacted you coming down this path?
Not as much as you might think. I mean,
Okay.
my path into the field was really has more to do with my grandfather than it does my experience as a kid. I didn't really know much about finance or anything else, but my grandfather was very interested in it and was, a successful investor in his own right. And so I don't want to kind of blow my childhood out of proportion in the sense that like I was one of the lucky ones that had a college that was paid for. My grandfather paid for my college. So my grandparents, not my grandfather, my grandma, and my grandfather. Um, so I have immense blessings. So I don't want to kind of overstate how difficult my childhood was. Um, but my grandfather certainly had more of an impact on me getting into the field of finance. He actually wanted me to be a CPA, he wanted me to be an accountant. So I actually majored in accounting in college as a direct result of that. And about 5 minutes into that career, I knew it wasn't the one for me. But I knew I liked finance. And so, that it took me a couple years to get there, but that's how I ended up in finance more or less.
Okay, so now that you're in finance, and I promise listeners we will get to the good, well, not the good stuff. I think your story is the good stuff of this podcast, but the retirement stuff we'll get to in a minute. What was it about retirement that was so attractive to you that you wanted to make that your specialty? Because you don't work with anybody that's not focusing on retirement, correct?
No, pretty much. I mean, I have a couple kind of clients from the past that I've stuck with that are younger. But outside of that, anybody that's new that's coming on is a retiree or somebody who's nearing retirement, and that really came about from when I moved to Pittsburgh. I took over an office here with my prior firm, and what happened was most of the clients that I was dealing with on a regular basis were retirees, which was not something I was dealing with when I was back in the DC area. And I just found that it was far more complicated. It was far more complex. Clients had a lot more in depth questions, and there's far more on the line. I mean, their entire rest of their life is at stake. And I enjoyed the complexity and I enjoyed putting all the puzzle pieces together to help people figure it out. And so I'm I'm a nerd that's out in the open. So the idea of going out and learning more about all these various things was very attractive to me. And so working with retirees and helping them answer questions was really my first foray. And then I decided that, I wanted that to be kind of all that I did and kind of become an expert rather than a generalist. And so that's when I decided to dedicate myself to nothing but that.
And we've talked about this before as far as having a niche, and from the advisor perspective, how that can help you if you're going to leverage content to help grow your business. Being focused on one group makes it a lot easier, because really all you need to stay up on and write about and talk about is retirement type stuff. So it makes it easier versus someone like myself that covers a variety of areas. There's a lot of stuff to go through and sort through. So for the advisors out there listening, this is just another piece of evidence that niche practices do have a benefit as far as focusing your energies and your efforts and the expertise that you have. So let's give people some of these puzzle pieces. I sent over, and my idea was, let's talk about like the 4 or 5 mistakes that people make, which, to be honest with you, as you shot back, hey, let's look at things that you can do to help more of a positive look on my question. It kind of surprised me because I usually frame most things in a positive light, and I put it on the negative. So I'm glad that you checked me, and we're going to go on the positive route. So we prepared a little bit beforehand just so we had some ideas to talk about. But why don't you walk through a few of the things that, if you were going to be, retiring yourself, so this is not advice for other people, but if you're retiring yourself, what are 3 or 4 of the things that you think are the most important things to get right to give you the best shot at a strong retirement?
I'm all about the big rocks. So helping people figure out what are the things that truly move the needle. And the idea of doing it in this way stems from a question I've gotten a couple of times, which I'm going to have a blog post about this next week. But a question I've been getting recently is, what's the number one thing I can do to increase my probability of success in retirement? And so again, not advice, whatever, all the disclaimers that come along with that. But I did some thinking about that question. I think at least from a overall perspective, it comes down to one thing. But there's 4 major rocks that I think if you get right, you certainly increase your probability of success exponentially. But the first thing that comes to mind, and the thing I think moves the needle the most, is your expenses in retirement. So having a good estimate of your expenses, and then the idea of reducing your spending in retirement. I don't mean reducing your spending, but reducing your costs without sacrificing quality of life. So, most people don't realize this, but in general terms, for every $100 you save per month, so if you could cut $100 in expenses, that's roughly the equivalent of $30,000 in portfolio value. And that's just based on a simple 4% rule. So, $1,200 a year divided by 4% is $30,000. So every $100 you cut out of your budget, that's basically like the equivalent of either kind of adding or not needing, whichever way you look at it, $30,000 in portfolio value. So, I went through Beth, my wife is Beth. So Beth and I went through our own budget over the last couple of years and have, taken a look at how we might be able to save, kind of coming back to that frugal mentality. How can we go about saving money without really impacting our lifestyle negatively? So I figured it might be helpful if I shared a few of those ideas here, and then people can take it and do with it what they will.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we did is cut cable, and I realize this is a very popular idea as we speak, but I didn't realize how beneficial it would be. So Beth and I used to pay about $190 a month to Verizon for cable. Well, we got rid of Verizon cable, if you will, and just kept their internet, because you still have to have internet if you're going to. And then we signed on for Hulu streaming. So this is not an endorsement of any of these companies or products, by the way, but just kind of sharing what we did. So, our monthly bill went from basically $190 all the way down to $90, and it could have been cheaper, but I like live sports, so I couldn't get rid of those. So we saved $100 a month right there. We changed security system providers. We used to use Guardian, and we changed over to Simply Safe. That was $20 a month. Like some of these are not huge, but they're easy savings that we haven't sacrificed anything. In fact, coming back to the cutting cable, I actually think I enjoy it more than I did cable. So we shop at Trader Joe's more now, as an example. Trader Joe's versus a typical grocery store chain. We might save $150 a month. And oh, by the way, we eat a little bit better as a result as well. Not as many kind of packaged foods and stuff like that. I still, for anybody that's actually watching this, I still have an old iPhone. So we have not, we're hanging on to our phones. So, most of the phones these days are pretty much incrementally better rather than exponentially better. So the idea of holding on to my phone outside of the battery life that is a little bit of a struggle, I figure it's saving us about $70 a month. We got new quotes on property and casualty. This was a couple years ago, but got new quotes on property and casualty insurance. So homeowners, auto, umbrella policies, that's saving another $100 a month. So, you add all that up, that's somewhere along the lines of $450 a month, all in. And if you think about that, if you're a retiree and if all you did was just do those same things and it amounted to the same amount of money, you're somewhere in the ballpark of $130,000 to the better on terms of a portfolio value. So if you're really tight in terms of, you think you might make it, well, based on, what your situation is. Well, if you can make some of these changes that, oh, by the way, have no impact in terms of no negative impact in terms of our quality of life, it was the easiest $450 to save ever. And we did, and that's a $450 savings that happens each and every single month. And so, if you're a retiree and you're nearing retirement and you think your numbers are going to be close, then these are some easy ways. And then if you get into the bigger items, so the idea of paying off your home or downsizing, or some people have 2 houses, some people have 3 houses even. The idea of bigger items equal bigger savings. So you get into these other types of ideas, and you can really make a material difference in your retirement by just reducing your expenses. And it doesn't mean that you have to not spend this money. I mean, theoretically, let's say that you were perfectly comfortable in your retirement, but you find a way to save $500 a month in your monthly budget easily. Well, that's an extra vacation per year or 2 vacations per year. Doesn't mean you have to then save it, but the idea is to at least keep your same quality of life, if not improve it, by just making a couple small changes.
And again, that is advice for budgeting for somebody nearing retirement. But this is not, this is not the latte experiment here of how you can find more money to save while you're accumulating.
No, definitely not the latte.
Yeah, this is where you're later in your career, incomes are probably at the highest you're coming off of, and now you're going to go into a situation where you no longer have a fixed income, save Social Security, and you're trying to tighten things up. So I just wanted to make sure listeners weren't thinking we were saying this is a way to help build wealth. This is a way to help go into retirement and clean things up to where you get to still have the TV shows you want and have the insurance coverages that you need, but you're just saving money by revisiting it. And again, to your point, you can deploy those elsewhere. Carl Richards had an awesome tweet. I'm trying to find real quick. I can summarize it. I actually highlighted it on one of my rundowns last week, but basically it was around budgeting. And he said that a budget is a way to allocate dollars towards your values. And I really, really like that, because I think when you say budget, I think people tense up. They view budget as a restriction.
Totally.
The budget is this is all the money I can spend. This is all the money I have. And it's kind of more of a restriction, where I think that Carl's approach of viewing it as this is determining where you get to allocate the dollars to your values I think it's a more empowering way. I really like it. It's a positive way to look at the word budget. So when you think about this and you're going into retirement and you figure out through your retirement planning of how much income you have each month to live off of and sustain your plan, then you can go through and reverse engineer and say, okay, here's where I want to allocate those dollars. And then you back into, okay, we're not going to do these smaller things, or we need to revisit some of this to be able to hit all of our things. But I think allocating your dollars towards your values is a great way to look at a budget, not as a restriction.
Well, I also,
the bad thing about the cable thing though is, and there's plenty of people have made this joke, since so many places are chopping things up, you're going to have like 30 services and it's going to be just as much as cable. You just go back to the bundle.
Well, that's possibly true, but I will push back a little bit in terms of the wealth. This is definitely not a latte factor, because the latte factor, as is always discussed, is you're cutting something out of your life. So you are reducing the quality of your lifestyle. But each one of those things I noted have not negatively impacted our lifestyle at all. they've just been easy money to find. So to say that this is not something that could help somebody in the wealth accumulation phase of their life wouldn't be true, because let's say, I mean, in reality, what we really did do is improve our savings by $450 a month without negatively impacting our quality of life. So the latte factor, I think this is slightly different. We're just trying to find easy savings, like that doesn't affect our quality of life at all. The latte factor is solely, well, you should cut back because it's imprudent. Well, I'm not necessarily about doing that. I'm about trying to find easy money that shouldn't have been being spent anyway. Because if it's out there and I can get an equivalent service or product or value for less money, then that's just being prudent, as opposed to saying, well, you shouldn't have this because you can't afford it. So just kind of different perspective.
Yeah, you're making your money more efficient. It's the same
Bingo.
as you have
Better said.
money sitting in savings. Do you earn 0.1% at your big bank, or do you go to an online bank and earn 2.1%? It's sitting there anyways. You might as well earn as much. The reason I brought up the latte factor more was there are some people, which would have been you growing up, that you couldn't go in and tinker with the budget. Like there's no
Totally.
room to
Yeah,
squeeze
we were
out.
minimal. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I was when I brought the latte factor up, I just meant more of for people that are earlier in their lives, earlier in their careers, there may not be the opportunity to scale back. There may not be these other luxuries that are built into life to be able to make adjustments to. That's all I was referring to.
100%.
I shouldn't have used latte factor, so we're on the same page there. But yeah, I think efficiency, you're being more efficient with your money, which is a smart thing to do.
Much better said. So the other is choosing a good Social Security strategy. So Social Security gets a lot of press these days, mainly negative press, which I'm not really going to touch on the political aspects of it. But choosing
you have a blog post for that, right?
I do actually, not a politically infused one, but I do have a couple of blog posts on Social Security. But I think it'd be more beneficial, at least in this kind of avenue, to look at it in terms of a framework of thinking about Social Security. So how should you begin to think about when you should claim? And so I look at it as two decisions. So, most households, not every household, certainly the households that aren't in this situation are in an even better situation, but you have a higher earning spouse in most households, and you have a lower earning spouse in most households. If you're equivalent, then, that's there's a whole other discussion involved in that regard. But if you have a higher earning spouse, so there's plenty of financial advisors out there, and I'm one of them, that says you should wait until 70 to file for Social Security. And mathematically speaking, assuming that you live to your life expectancy or beyond, or your spouse lives to your life expectancy or beyond, that ends up being the smart decision. But an easier way to look at it, if you think about it, is the higher earning spouse, when it comes to the Social Security decision, should be thinking about the spouse that is going to be second to die. Okay, so if you think about it, the second to die, the joint life expectancy for the average couple, the average non-smoking couple, is 92 years old. So if the higher earning spouse waits until age 70, then that means there's 22 years, give or take, of that benefit that's going to be available to the family, whether that's the higher earning spouse or the lower earning spouse, because most people don't realize that when the higher earning spouse passes away, they will get the lower earning spouse will then get their spouse's Social Security benefit. So the higher earning spouse should always be thinking about the second to die, whereas the lower earning spouse should be thinking about the first to die. So the way I think about it is, it kind of is you walk through the process of thinking about, well, when should you file? And if you're the lower earning spouse, because the higher earning spouse is it's probably best for them to wait until 70. But the lower earning spouse, there's a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more moving pieces. So I look at it as the lower earning spouse then files either at their retirement, at the retirement of the breadwinner, or 62, whichever is later. So of those three options, which is later? So if the breadwinner doesn't retire until 66 or 67, then that's when the lower earning spouse should probably file. Obviously, none of these are hard and fast. You should run these numbers with your advisor. But as a general rule, now the lower earning spouse sometimes is the second one to retire. So, I've seen the higher earning spouse retire first. The lower earning spouse continues to work for a little while. well, then the lower earning spouse still wouldn't file because their retirement has not occurred yet. So it's the later of one of those three, which is at your retirement, at the retirement of the breadwinner, or at age 62, whichever is later. So now, and it's all dependent on there's so many possibilities of situations that it's impossible to say that even those three are the only answers that you should consider. But as a general rule, those are probably pretty good rules of thumb.
I think a real good rule of thumb is not to make it an emotional decision. Like
Absolutely.
don't say you're going to collect Social Security at an age because you think you're entitled to it or you think you should or you're afraid it's going to go away. Like strip all the emotions out and then look at the numbers. And kind of my approach is same thing, trying to figure out how can we structure this to address longevity, but play the edge, play both sides and maybe get some early on. So I would favor a similar approach to what would you recommend. If you run an optimizer, it's going to say both at 70, like you mentioned. But I like to take it on a year by year basis because there can be things that come up that we can say we're going to wait until 70, but then there could be a health event come up where, okay, maybe life expectancy has all of a sudden changed and we need to revamp things. The other thing to take into consideration is, do you have enough money or are you planning to be able to fund those years while you wait? And if you look at the average 401k balance, people may not be able to afford to do that. So it may have to be they have to take it sooner because of their personal situation, or they have to work longer to get closer to that gap. But like you said, there's so many things to go into it. But I think a lot of people just think as soon as I turn 62, I'm drawing Social Security because that's when I can draw it. When the reality is, it's probably better to evaluate a situation where you wait longer to maximize what you get. I had one client, I think I've told this story in another podcast, but I had one client I was trying to explain this to, and she was adamant about taking it at 62. Didn't need the income, was actually going to save it and not even invest it. So she couldn't even have the argument of, well, I can outpace the increase I'd get from Social Security by investing it. And I said, my final approach was, look, if you're sitting in heaven at 63 and God forbid you passed away early, are you going to be mad if you don't take that Social Security since you don't need it? And she said, yes. So I was like, all right, well, I can't win this argument that like
Yeah.
you're too emotional into it. And and actually she's not a client anymore just because she wasn't taking my advice. So there's no point to pay me. But I think taking emotions out of that decisions and making it purely a financial decision is the best approach. And that will help you make the decision that's probably going to be best for the plan because it's one of those decisions that is really irrevocable. Yes, if you make a decision early enough and you pay it back, you can readjust it. But for most people, once you make this and you're living off of it, your decision's set. You're not going to be able to change it.
Well, there's also so many people look at Social Security as if they're waiting in line for a movie. They get up to the counter and they get said, "Oh, the guy in front of you got the last one." It's like that's not really the way Social Security works at all. Not even in the ballpark. But that's the way so many approach it, which is why so many people take it at age. I think only 4% of people take it at age 70. Or something very low, something much lower than what the typical academic or advisor would say is prudent. But some people, the situations, their hands are forced, and certainly that every situation is unique.
And sometimes the situation doesn't make that big of a difference. Like I've run scenarios where option A versus option B was like $40,000 difference over lifetime.
Over their life, yeah. It's like,
yeah. And at that point,
yeah.
I say, okay, well, what makes you feel better? And then let's go with that one because that $40,000 over the next 30 years is not going to make or break your plan. That we'll just do the one that makes you feel most comfortable, so you feel satisfied with the option that we made. But sometimes it's drastic, and then it's like you have to take this because it makes this big of a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the key takeaway from this is know that there are multiple options, and it's worth taking the time to sit down to analyze the numbers to help figure out what's the best for the plan. Don't just go grab it as soon as you can grab it.
Yeah, many times it makes sense if you have the assets. A lot of times it makes sense to use that kind of bridge portfolio to get you to age 70. It surprises a lot of people to know that an advisor would say spend down your money so that you can, wait for Social Security, which is something I advocate for regularly.
All right. So since we talked about Social Security, let's talk about Medicare and Medigap and all that stuff.
So Medicare is a unique animal, and it is probably one of the most misunderstood within the retirement community. So you have traditional Medicare, which is often called Medigap, and then you have Medicare Advantage plans. So I'm not going to get into the A, B, C, D, and all that stuff because, frankly, we don't have enough time to go through all that. But I want to touch on one primary thing with regard to Medigap versus Medicare Advantage. First of all, Medicare Advantage plans are what is, quote, sold. So when you see advertisements or you get contacted by a Medicare person, most of the time what they're selling is a Medicare Advantage plan. So what that means is that you are probably going to be utilizing the insurer that is local to you. So here in Pittsburgh, that's Allegheny Health and UPMC. So if you buy one of those plans, and then let's just say that you're a bit of a traveler, you expect to spend a good bit of time in retirement traveling. Well, if I go to Arizona for the winter, well, the entire time you're in Arizona, you are out of network. So Medicare Advantage plans have distinct issues when it comes to that. So I'm not saying that Medigap is best for everybody or that Medicare Advantage is best for everybody. Generally speaking, Medicare Advantage plan premiums are lower than Medigap, but you also don't have really a capped cost. So, I mean, you may have an extramental, you may have an extreme cap cost, but on the overall, your costs are less capped, we'll say. And if you're a traveler, well, then you're going to pay out of network prices. Versus if you were to utilize a Medigap plan, your costs are more contained. So you may pay more in premiums, but that's pretty much what your annual outlay is going to be. And then if you're a traveler, which this is really what I think comes down to for many retirees, because a lot of retirees, whether they have a ton of money or not, they want to go spend time at their grandkids' house, and they're going to spend time there for, at times extended periods of time or whatever. Well, if you go seek any medical assistance, if you're on a Medicare Advantage, you're going to pay out of network. If you're under Medigap, you can go to any doctor that takes Medicare and you are covered. And so there are some distinct advantages to Medigap that I think many people don't realize, because Medicare Advantage is what is sold, because most of these agents are compensated, and rightfully so. I mean, there's a lot of value to be had there as well. But I think it's important to know that it's just important to educate yourself on Medicare. This is, in many times, an irrevocable decision. If you sign up for Medicare Advantage plans, most of the time you cannot go back. You can, but you have to go through medical underwriting and a variety of other things, which most times the only reason people want to go back to Medigap is because they realize their costs are more contained and they're having health issues. So most people get refused from Medigap once they've been there. If you sign up for Medigap, you can always go to Medicare Advantage plans. So there are some distinct advantages to Medigap that Medicare Advantage doesn't have. But like I said, Medicare Advantage can be a little bit lower premium. So some people tend to, particularly people who have less assets, may choose to go that route because it's more cost effective for them, at least up front. And if they're healthy, then they say, well, there's not a big risk for me there. So just choosing your plan wisely and educating yourself. I mean, so many of my thoughts are always educate yourself, because, and that's what, Justin, obviously we're all about here.
Well, I think it's just another one of those cases where, just like Social Security, you see you can draw it at 62. It's money, you want to go grab it, but you don't understand the full implications of what that could mean or what you're missing out on. Same thing. I'm going to go with the cheaper option. I'm going to fixed income, but in the end, it could be a much more expensive option depending on what happens. And to your point of not knowing what you don't know, I mean, to not know that you aren't covered if you're out of state. And to your point, everybody thinks of travel being around the road travel or retirement travel, but it could be as simple as driving to the next state to go see your grandkids and having a heart attack or something.
Totally.
I learned out about that when we switched to exchange plans for our insurance, which we're not on anymore, but it was only good in Indiana because they're state run. And that scared the death out of me. It scared me to death because I think I'm not living only in Indiana, and God forbid I get hurt somewhere on vacation. Like that's going to bankrupt my family for whatever it might be because it's so expensive. So again, the whole point to all of this, and you hit on it, is to provide education and also to get people to start thinking and asking questions and determine what's best, not just go for what is the easiest or what somebody else did because they told you. Learn and make sure what you're building, whether it's your plan, your savings, your budget, your insurance, build it to what is best for you and your personal situation, not for what other people are doing. And don't take the easy route, because the easy route isn't always the best route.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll finish up with portfolio.
All right. So I think the last one is just finding a portfolio strategy that works for you. I mean, I am on record as saying I'm an advocate for dividend growth investing. But that doesn't necessarily mean what's right for anybody. What I think is important is The issues facing retirees today are rising life expectancy, inflation. We're at historically low bond yields still. We're at a pretty close to a stock market peak. Not to say that they can't go up from here. I'm not indicating that at all. But when it comes to investing, you're not really looking for growth or income, which is always the conversation within many of the retiree forums, or you go to advisors and they talk about, well, you need growth, or no, you need income. It's not growth or income. You should be looking for growth of income. I think that dividend growth investing is sort of the way that I look at it, as to what I believe to be best. It doesn't mean it's right for everybody, but dividend growth investing, I believe, is uniquely qualified or uniquely suited to retirement. And just as an example, since 1960, the growth of dividends of the S&P 500, obviously, which is an unmanaged index, and we could go on about that, but dividends as a piece of the S&P 500 since 1960 have grown at a compounding rate of close to 5.8%. Comparing that to the inflation rate of, say, let's say that's close to 3%. It's almost doubled the average annual inflation rate. And so couple that with the fact that dividend growers tend to be less volatile than the overall market, and then you're putting this strategy together with a fixed income portfolio to hopefully make up any shortfalls on an as-you-go basis. And the idea is, but I'm kind of agnostic. That's what I believe, but I'm agnostic to what the best or optimal strategy is, because the only way we can find out what the best or optimal strategy is via the rear view mirror. There is no way to project what's going to work out best in the long run. I mean, there's plenty of retirement planners that I highly, highly respect that advocate for total return investing, and I'm fine with that. It's the key is to find a strategy that works best for you, that you can hold on to through all markets. Whether you're investing in the type of portfolio that I advocate for, or the type of portfolio that you advocate for, Justin, or anybody else, if that client can't stick with it, it's pretty much a useless portfolio. So the idea is to find one that makes sense for you. The idea is to educate yourself and find a philosophy that you can align with, that you believe you can ride out through all markets, and you'll be much more successful as a result, I believe.
That was my biggest thing, is that it's just what you can stick with. A plan isn't any good, a portfolio is not any good if you can't stick to it. So, and at the end of the day, the longer I've been doing this, I've come to realize that the differences that a lot of us advisors bicker over will probably only make minor differences in the long-term performance. Like if you're in a diversified global portfolio and we're bickering over value over growth or small cap premium, like at the end of the day, that's probably not going to be the decision that makes or breaks your plan. I mean, maybe it could
100%.
be, but probably not going to be. It's probably going to be the budgeting and those other decisions along the way, the behavior. So I think that, sometimes keeping it more simple is better, and having the allocation, focusing on things we can control, like expenses, taxes, behavior, and just let that work for you. Sure, you might be able to eke out a little bit more, and there might be some people that can pick individual stocks and be successful over the long run, but that's not most of us. So get the market participation that has been proven to work over the long term. Manage your behavior, manage your cash flow. I think is a big thing for retirees. So make sure that what you might need in the next year or so is not tied up in the market, so that if we have a big crisis, you're not forced to sell. You've got liquidity in areas that is not going to be down 30% to live your life and give those funds time to recover, and then you can regroup and move forward. So I think that is the real value to the portfolio, is structuring the portfolio for income, grow that income like you talked about, and not worry about all the details of, do I have enough value? Do I have enough growth? What's technology doing? Like, those are fun stories, but I don't think it's as impactful as the profession wants it to be in the long run.
Well, it's like what they say, all right? An 80% solution implemented at 100% effort is always going to be a 100% solution that's never implemented.
Right.
So, it makes a whole lot more sense to do it that way, for sure.
All right, I think we gave everybody some good things to think about heading into retirement. And honestly, you could scale these things back, and they would apply to non-retirees as well. Maybe not the Social Security, but the budgeting type of stuff, the portfolio stuff. I think that applies to everybody. So I think that we gave some good non-advice but educational information and questions to ask your financial advisor and think about as you go through the process. And I think
Absolutely.
I think one final thing I would throw out there is, don't wait until the year before retirement to start thinking through these things. I think of I have one thing I'll add to the mix because I do have clients that retire. I encourage retirees to practice being retired from an income
Amen. Yeah.
standpoint. So if we say that this is going to be your income for retirement, then live off of that for a year leading up to it. So if you're making more than that, carve that money off into savings and see if you can actually live on that budget. Now it's not going to be perfect because once you retire, your expenses are going to change. You're going to have more free time, but it will at least see if it's realistic. Because in our mind, we can say, yes, I can live off of X amount of dollars, but can you really live off of that much money? Why don't you try
Yeah.
it and practice it? And then that gives us time to regroup the plan and see if we need to make any last minute changes. But a lot of people, they don't seek out advice and help until 3 months before they want to retire. And I think it's not too late, but it's pretty daggone close.
The proof's in the pudding for sure.
All right. So I'm the king of non-smooth transitions. So I love to work in wellness and fitness as well into my conversations. And I know that you have a very good routine. So I do think that wellness and fitness is important to the planning process because we talked about Medicare, Medigap coverage, like health is going to be an expense. So let's take care of ourselves. What do you do to keep yourself in shape, and how does wellness fit into your life?
When it comes to wellness, I also want to mention real quick that because you tweeted that I ate a donut after your workout, one of the things that I rank for now is donuts. So I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Now, so my fitness routine is pretty simple, if you want to call it a routine at all. I run in the summer. I like running. I mean, I probably like last night. I probably ran 3.5 miles or so. I enjoy running. I know you don't. But one thing I know you can get on board with, I play basketball every single week, every Sunday night. And then I haven't been to a weight room in a while, which will upset many of your followers. But I used to lift weights a lot, but I just don't much anymore. So I pretty much stick to calisthenics. I do a lot of push-ups, pull-ups, those types of activities. So it's really not, there's not much of a routine to it. I know I need to stay healthy and stay active. I want to be around for a long time for my boys and certainly my wife as well. But it's that's pretty much sums up my fitness routine, if you will.
So I would encourage you to bring weight training back in. Now, I'm not an expert when it comes to fitness, but I have read enough studies that there is a lot of benefit to weight training. So the push-ups and pull-ups and the body weight stuff is good, but lifting heavy weight from time to time is also a benefit. So just, a little bit of squatting, a little bit of deadlift, and maybe some bench from time to time. You don't have to go crazy strongman type stuff, but implementing a little bit of weight into it, I think would be good as well.
I want to get back into it. I was just telling Beth that the other day. I really want to get back into lifting. Not anything crazy like I probably used to, but I definitely want to get back into it more. That's for sure. It's on the horizon.
Well, I'll make sure you get the weight room with me at Wellstack. So I have a question for everybody, the same question every episode, but I want to bring back last year's just to get your answer. So last year's question I asked everybody was, how do you define wealth?
Probably similarly, I've listened to almost every one of your episodes, so probably very similarly to most. I would say that, family is wealth to me. I have 2 boys that are my whole world, an amazing wife. My siblings are pretty much my other best friends in the world. So, frankly, I can't imagine being any wealthier than I already am. So family has, just like most of your guests, has absolutely nothing to do with money whatsoever.
All right. And then this year's question, what's the best financial decision you've ever made?
So I definitely would not say this was a financial decision at the time, but it ended up being probably by far the best financial decision that I made. And that is marrying Beth, my wife, which is, we see eye to eye on everything financially speaking. So I certainly didn't know this was a financial decision at the time, which is why I would encourage anybody that's on the verge of getting married or considering getting married to have these conversations with your spouse. But Beth and I see eye to eye on virtually everything financially speaking. We're both pretty frugal people. I mean, not extreme frugality, but certainly seeing eye to eye and understanding how the other views money and how we each spend money, I think is extremely important and understated. So definitely, I actually had to think about that one for a little while. You sent that to me in advance, and I had to think about that. But the easy answer was definitely Beth.
That's a good point as far as communication. So to those thinking about getting married, like communication is the key, but I forget the statistic. I used to know it, but like a lot of divorces stem from financial, and a lot of that's because both people aren't on the same page. Somebody's hiding something, somebody's overspending. You've got credit cards being run up that you don't know about, and it just creates drama. So being on the same page and having the communication. Ange and I did a podcast a long time ago
I
about how
remember I
important
listened
it
to
is in communication. So I would second that, but that is a good, and we'll have to make sure Beth hears this episode so you get brownie points for that.
it. Well, I don't know that she would like being referred to as a financial decision, but it ended up being a very good one, even though it had nothing to do with it at the time.
It was meant with all love. She would appreciate that. All right, Ashby. Well, in closing, where can everybody find you? I will link to you to the blog and everything, but what's the blog? Where are you at on Twitter? Where can they find you?
So the blog is Retirement Field Guide, not guy, but retirementfieldguide.com. And then on Twitter, it's at Daniels Ashby. And that's pretty much it. So I really keep things simple, but everything starts and ends with the blog for me. So that's definitely the place to go.
All right. Well, I will link to that so everybody can find you and follow you. Definitely should, because you're going to hear from him a lot over the coming years about this area, and he's going to be the go-to guy. I think you need to find out if the retirement field guy is available and lock that down as well, so you can have both
I probably
of those.
should. But hey, before we
I'm going to go buy it now.
yeah, thanks so much. But before we cut off, I want to say I appreciate everything that you do, both for our profession, for our industry, and certainly for your clients. I'm a huge fan of yours, and thankful to be your friend. So I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thanks, Ashby. I guess you're welcome. I always feel bad. I always answer thanks very bad. So it's my pleasure. I enjoy this. You become a very good friend. I've enjoyed our conversations, our Slack messages, our texts. Like, you motivate me to keep doing more and pushing myself. So you become a great friend as well. So the feeling is mutual. But thank you. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks again, Ashby, for joining. Allaboutyourbenjamins.com is where you can find the show notes. Go follow Ashby, the Retirement Field Guide. I'll have links to that. And we'll see you all in the next episode. Justin here again. To listen to more episodes of All About Your Benjamins, the podcast, head over to allaboutyourbenjamins.com or find it on iTunes. If you have any guests or topics you'd like to hear covered, you can email me at contact@allaboutyourbenjamins.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Justin Castelli. That's at JUS10CASTELLI. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review on iTunes to help make it easier for more people to find All About Your Benjamins, the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it.